After 16 years in service, Councillor Geoff Brodie has been elected chairman of the Isle of Wight Council, and one of his first acts was to remove formal prayers at the start of council meetings. Now, this will come as no surprise, since he has never hidden his atheism, and he has always made clear his view that formal prayers are an imposition on those who don't believe. That doesn't mean he proposes to ban prayers completely, only replace them with a period of reflection that's inclusive of everyone. Religious councillors would, of course, be free to pray themselves, but not as part of the formal procedure of meetings. Nevertheless, Councillor Brodie's action has caused a furore among opposing councillors, some of whom, according to Councillor Steve Hastings, are even disgusted that Geoff would even allow a full motion agenda, would not allow, rather, a full motion agenda to discuss this issue. Now, I should point out here that formal prayers before council meetings are still the norm at most council gatherings throughout the country. And given the media interest in this matter, I'm delighted to say that Geoff has agreed to be interviewed in this Humanistically Speaking special. So thank you, Geoff, and welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start by asking you why you felt so strongly about this matter and whether you expected such a strong response to your decision.
Well, to be honest with David, all of my adult life I've been a non-believer in organised faith. I'm very clear about that. I've never been persuaded otherwise. I'm in my early 60s now, and from the first day that I was elected as an Isle of Wight councillor back in 2005, I was astonished, to be frank, that they still had prayers as a formal part of a full council meeting. And from the beginning, every 4 years now, I have proposed a motion to abandon that practice, with varying degrees of failure. I think at times a couple of votes. I can't remember them all. I think I once got about 8 votes out of a 40-member council, so that wasn't too bad. And I, once again, prior to having any indication that I was going to be chairman of the council, as soon as I was elected on the 6th of May, tabled my traditional motion for the start of my 5th term. So it was on the agenda, and then it subsequently transpired that the alliance that is now in control of the Isle of Wight Council wanted me to be their chairman for this first year, because it's a very closely balanced council, and I'm considered a very strong chairman of whatever meeting I chair. So I was in the strange position of being elected right at the start of our annual meeting. That obviously meant that I understand the Constitution as well as anybody amongst our membership, that one of the things that would be traditionally expected of me, but isn't within our Constitution, is the appointment of a Christian chaplain to conduct prayers at the start of a meeting. Now, in my view, and this is shared by quite a lot of people who are Christians, they think that's entirely ridiculous for Geoff Brodie to appoint a Christian chaplain to conduct prayers. I mean, apart from anything else, it would be entirely hypocritical of me, but it would just bring ridicule to the whole process. I could have just left it, David, to be honest, but I didn't. And one of my first announcements was that I would not be appointing a Christian chaplain. And frankly, it was met with silence, absolute silence, which is unusual in a council meeting in my experience. And we moved on through the rest of the agenda, and the final item on the agenda was my motion, which I withdrew because there was no need for it anymore. And to continue the story, I left the meeting, and frankly, for the next few days, I received no criticism of whatsoever on the island. I got lots of thanks, lots of congratulations for at last getting rid of this arcane practice that it just doesn't sit with a supposedly secular organisation like a local authority. And it was then I spoke to the National Secular Society. Society who did an interview with me. I've had all sorts of radio stations. I haven't responded to them all because I've got better things to do, to be honest. Warsaw Radio.
Glad you included us.
Yeah, Warsaw Radio. Well, you know, I don't think I really need to bother myself too much with a largely Catholic population. You know, and then the first thing I saw on the BBC website was the new leader of the opposition, the Conservative Councillor Steve Hastings, described a level of disgust at my decision, which I found quite astonishing. I know Steve very well. We rub along reasonably well despite our political differences. And he certainly never expressed any disgust to my face. And I took the decision after a period of reflection, because you know, I may be religious, but I do reflect on things, I do contemplate things, that I would ask officers to set up alternative arrangements for those who may wish to pray, who may wish to have a period of reflection, half an hour before full council, in a separate venue within our county hall. And that's going to be led by my vice chair, who is a Christian, who's entirely relaxed about my decision. And she's going to lead that. It won't be formal part of the full council or anything.
Well, that sounds a very tolerant, open-minded.
Well, you know, that's, you know, I mean, I said that right at the start when I announced my decision. I was entirely relaxed about that. I mean, frankly, I mean, there's a beautiful church in our county town of Newport where I am a councillor, you know, which when the doors are open, I quite often go in there because it's a nice, cool place and a place to sit and contemplate things and have a think about things, a bit of peace and quiet. You know, I mean, they don't ban atheists that I'm aware of yet, you know, and my name's actually on a board in there as the chair of the parish council in the past, which is ironic. You know, so most of the councillors who would favour prayers, to be honest with you, Dave, have not really objected that much. It's Councillor Hastings that's created a little bit of a fuss. And then after about a week or so, I got a couple of people objecting. Somebody sent me a clip he'd put on Facebook who was well, I know of him of old, and I just ignored that. To be honest with you, I'm not responding to a lot of this, and we'll move on.
Now, can I introduce Martin,
Yes.
Martin Biermann, who was an independent councillor for over 20 years here in Basingstoke. And he was Mayor of Basingstoke and Dean between 2012 and 2013. And he did something similar. And welcome to you too, Martin. Delighted that you've joined us. So first of all, did you allow a full motion debate over this issue before you announced the change?
No, I didn't get to that. But just before I go into the details of the process, I'd just like to say hello to my fellow traveller.
Hello there, Martin.
I know we're not alone in this thinking, but it seems something that's doggedly hanging on in the processes of many councils. And I think eventually, I'd like to think it will eventually change, but for the moment we have to live with things as they are and work around it. Apart from the fact that I've never sort of formally said I am an atheist, I've always sort of described myself as an agnostic. I probably have to do that because I started with Christian associations and all the rest of it. I've certainly not been an active member of any religious group for many, many years. The process in the mayoralty is slightly different from what I heard about your chairmanship, in as much as there's a formal procedure quite well in advance of what they call the mayor making, when you are expected to do things like announce who your chaplain is and all the rest of it. So I had quite a bit of time to think about it. And I, in fact, at that stage decided that I certainly didn't want a religious chaplain, but what I felt there was some virtue in having somebody who was, if you like, looking beyond the secular side of things, that was looking at those that felt they wanted some spiritual uplifting in some way or another. And I thought the Humanists were ideal. But at that stage, David hadn't moved to Basingstoke, and I did some research, and the nearest humanist group I could find was in Farnborough, and it sort of didn't seem to associate properly with our borough. So, and I hope not to offend anybody in saying this, I took what I thought was the next best choice and got in touch with the Quakers, who, you know, have a sort of different way of doing their religion, and are very tolerant people and have lots of things in common with my take on life. I invited them to offer somebody, if they wished to, as a chaplain, and indeed they did. Well, they had a volunteer who came along and said she would be my chaplain. Well, that was the next thing. I didn't feel chaplain was the right word, so I described her as a spiritual advisor, which she was happy with. But we then got to the situation of the council meetings, and as you so rightly say, it's not a well, in some councils I believe it is part of the actual proceedings, but like in your situation, the prayers come and then you start. There's a sort of procession where the mayor comes in with the mace. Yep. Then the chaplain does their bit, and then the meeting starts. But I didn't want sort of the performance before and the prayers and all the rest of it with everybody in the room. And as a regular councillor, I'd often sort of I tend to sort of put my hand down when people are saying prayers, and they're not because I'm taking part, but I don't want to show disrespect to my neighbours and so on. But I sort of, as a councillor, looked around the chamber and saw quite a few people who looked uncomfortable during the prayer session. And so I certainly didn't think I'd be alone. But I made it clear that I wasn't going to offer prayers via the spiritual advisor. But I appreciated that some people might just want to not psych themselves up, but prepare themselves spiritually for the bashing around that was going to proceed, and that probably wasn't very Christian either in some cases. So that the people could do their praying as they wished, I arranged for a room similar to yourself. I didn't offer them any support per se. I said, you know, there's a room, do your praying, and then join the meeting. And I did indeed ask the Quaker lady to Sheila Peacock, I'll mention her name, she deserves it, to say some thoughts, some non-religious thoughts, and we would have then a minute's silence whilst people could be contemplative and adjust their feelings, if you like, to the forthcoming meeting. And that's what we did. And we had lots of grumbles in the background. It never seemed to hit the press in the way yours did. In a way I wished it had, because I thought it might have produced a bit more of a debate about it and a discussion about how nonsensical it all was, but it never did. But it was very strong thing. It was amongst many other things within the council, like not raising the flag at the right time and doing all sorts of other things that caused offence. And as soon as my term of office was over, we reverted to the bad old days. The two interesting things I would raise at this point, as David said in the introduction rightly, that I'm an independent, or was an independent councillor, and the only people who went to pray were the Tories. Nobody else seemed to be interested in praying, and indeed the only ones who complained to me were the Tories. So without being too pompous about it, I think it was much more of a political action than it was one of genuine spiritual concern.
Was that your experience, Geoff? That it was mainly conservative, or was it not partisan?
It was exclusively conservative in my part, David. Exclusively.
Exclusively conservative.
Yeah, yeah.
So what was the picture in your neck of the woods, Geoff? Was it conservative, or was it?
Well, yes. I mean, Councillor Hastings, who we alluded to earlier, I mean, he's the leader of the Conservative group. I think, to be honest with you, lots of the non-Conservatives have just gone along with this for a long time, while sticking their hands up when I proposed my quadrennial motion. You know, they've just gone. Interestingly, for every full council I've attended in 16 years until this latest one, I wait outside because prayers is very much formally part of the meeting, and I wait outside there with a deeply religious independent councillor who thinks it's entirely wrong that religion and politics, as he sees it, are mixed. He says it's like, you know, having a Church of England, it always is Church of England, vicar or deacon or whatever coming in is much like, me going down to the local church and speaking from the pulpit on Sunday. He just thinks it's ludicrous. Within our, we're a unitary county. That's why we have a chairman. We don't have a mayor. But, the process is, what they want me to go through is to go in with my chain of office on behind the mace bearer while they all stand up, go up there, and then have prayers. Now, that's just something that's just farcical for me to be part of. Yeah. I am now an independent councillor, but I make no secret of my politics are socialist and always have been socialist. I was a member of the Labour Party for many years. For most of my first 4 terms, I was a Labour councillor, which is unusual on the Isle of Wight. I'm very strong in my views. The older I get, I always described myself as an agnostic. As a younger man, I became more determined, more committed to the concept of atheism. In the last 20 years or so. But it is largely the Conservatives who claim to be religious. I don't believe most of them, to be frank. One of the lady councillors contacted me recently, who admitted, although she described herself as a Christian, she hadn't set foot inside a church for many years. And yet, she wants to, impose prayers on a secular organisation like a local authority.
Yeah, I'd like to back up on that, because I know as a humanist there are plenty of conservative atheists and even humanists around. And in fact, it brings to mind James Arbuthnot. I don't know if you remember him, but at the end of his career as a senior politician in the Conservative Party,
yes, I remember him.
He made an announcement that he was not just that he was an atheist, but he had been advised very early in his career to keep that quiet, as if that was something he should be ashamed of. And I actually met the man afterwards, much later, and he was. I found him a very genial chap, and it just seems so odd. I mean, why do you think? Why should this be a particularly conservative issue? I don't understand that, really, unless it's about Queen and country and religion. I don't know. Have you got any thoughts?
So, Geoff, just a question to you. From something you said, I was wondering whether it was not just the sort of full council meetings. Do you have prayers for some of the committees or not, or is it just full council?
Only full council.
Oh, right. Okay.
Only full council. It's just that, to be frank with you, we're a reasonably modern authority in many ways. It's because I've lived. You can tell I'm not from the Isle of Wight, but I've lived here for 30 years, and. When I first, I used to work for the council many years ago. I've always taken an interest in public affairs, and I used to sit in the public gallery in the 90s when it was very old-fashioned on the island, and there were no political parties effectively operating a county hall until the 80s. But it's become fairly modern. But there was just this very first bit of our full council meetings, where they want to, the Conservative Party largely want to impose, Christianity at the start, as if, it gives them the rubber stamp for some of the terrible decisions, I have to say, Conservatives have made in recent years in terms of service delivery. That's probably maybe, you can take, my politics coming out there, but, it feels like a rubber stamp. I have described myself as a socialist again as all my adult life, and I consider socialism closer to Christianity than anything the Conservative Party does.
Well, as I say, I was in fact elected as an independent.
Yes,
but the Tory party sort of have a good overview of my take on most things, and as far as they was concerned, I was bad as bad a socialist or a communist or anything else you can imagine. The main thing was I wasn't one of them, and that's what mattered.
Yes.
To them. Yeah. And I was worse still, as in fact in a seat that they have had previously. It's a 3-member ward, and I was the only one that wasn't a Conservative there. So as I say, it couldn't get much worse. Just coming back to the basic thing about what happens in the meetings. The one thing that has developed since I took the steps I did is that quite a few councillors, and that was mainly the Labour councillors, interestingly, they decided that they didn't want to be present for the prayers. So whilst nothing was done to provide alternative provision for them, they didn't want it. You know, they just wanted the prayers to go, I think. But they didn't enter the council chamber until such time as the prayers were over. But then that became a bit disruptive, because there'd be all this shuffling going on, and the mayor was trying to conduct the meeting and get, you know, the apologies out of the way and all the rest of it, and people were shuffling in and out and squeezing along the benches. And so now they have sort of semi-formalized that, in as much as the prayers are taken and then they invite any councillors not yet in the chamber to enter. Yep. So it's not an official abstention, but equally they're not a party to it.
I mean, just in response to that, yeah, it was very much formalised with my absence from the prayers part. That whomever was the chairman would never dare start a meeting without me in the room. I'm quite a forceful personality. You may pick that up, you know, but I would protest vehemently if any part of the business had started before I was in my seat, you know. And of course that delay, I mean, didn't only took a minute for me to get through the door and to the seat that's allocated to me, but certainly no chairman would allow anything important to be happening whilst I wasn't in the chamber, because I would be using procedural rules on a regular basis.
Yeah, that brings me on to another point, actually, about whether there's a specific advantage to those who attend prayers. I mean, clearly, you're not going to allow that. No, but I remember Joan Bakewell once gave a talk, who was a humanist herself, and a member of the House of Lords. And I understood from her that questions in the chamber are allowed on a kind of first come, first served basis in the House of Lords, although always, interestingly, after the bishop's questions have been addressed. And those who do not attend prayers, that is, those who enter the debating chamber after prayers are over, are disadvantaged. Absolutely. Because they don't get the chance to ask the questions. And I just wondered if anything like that can happen at council meetings. Evidently not in the Isle of Wight. What about Basingstoke, Martin?
No, I mean, the order paper is fairly well defined, and yes. And the procedures of the debate are fairly well defined, and I've never experienced anything that would even hint at that. In fairness, it would be wrong to say one was disadvantaged. No, that's one of the bad habits that haven't been adopted from central government. The cabinet system has, but that's a different thing. Going on to different territory.
I mean, we have questions, but they're much later on in the agenda. I mean, it's all pretty unimportant stuff, you know, minutes and stuff like that. But sometimes minutes need to be challenged. You know, the first time, you know, they're published without having ever been agreed. Yeah. On the say-so of whomever's the chairman. I'm going to have that right to do so in the future.
See, in practice, council meetings don't attract the sort of public attention that the House of Lords, and particularly the House of Commons, actually attracts. So I don't know how many members of the public come to council meetings, but I imagine that they're quite a small number. So I wonder how the public in general would react if they knew that lots of councils start with prayers as a matter of obligation, as required.
prior to COVID, you know, we get reasonable attendance at the council. I mean, it's a small, you know, it's an island community, you know, with a lot of local media entirely focused. I mean, as a councillor, you can't do anything, you know, without it being in the paper or on social media or whatever. You do get a reasonable attendance at full council. Not so much at committees, etc., unless there's something particularly topical. For instance, budget meeting every February, you know, we'll have an extremely good attendance, quite often with protests outside from trade unionists, etc., etc. And they will be expected, you know, to stand up and do the prayers thing as well. Now, when I was a member of the public, an ordinary member of the public, you know, I remained seated and, but you know, in the gallery, because I didn't want to lose my seat, because sometimes it would be that it's not that big, you know. I mean, it's easier for me now because I've got a guaranteed seat inside, you know, as a councillor. But quite often our public gallery, which isn't that big, you know, only holds about, well, I don't know, 30, 40 people, something like that. You know, it will be full for meetings that are of great interest to people. However, an adult population of 100,000, that's still pretty pathetic. But, you know, it does show there is some interest.
What about Basingstoke, Martin?
Yeah, well, we've got about 160,000 adults, so it's rather more. But we have the disadvantage that we're not a unitary authority. I mean, being a unitary, you're covering a much wider scope of things. And I would say anyway, I think there's probably this island community thing that Geoff has referred to, which doesn't exist to the same extent in Basingstoke. I mean, the majority of full council meetings, there's a few diehards. There was a gentleman, should we say a gentleman of the road, who used to turn up every full council meeting and add a few comments from the public gallery. And because of the nature of the guy, well, he had quite a history to him, that was sort of taken on board. And in fact, occasionally his commentary got claps from the councillors. But shall we say that was most unusual. And I think it would be fair to say any member of the public normally engaging in the meeting would be put down fairly quickly. I, as mayor, certainly would have done, because it isn't helpful. But like Geoff's example, if there was a big issue on, then we've had situations where the public gallery has been full, you know, for health and safety and all the rest of it. There's been a physical limit to that, where we've had cameras put up in the main committee room, well, not cameras, screens, and the debate has been screened into that committee room, so that the people at least felt that they had some engagement directly with what was going on. And, you know, physical restraints are physical restraints, and I certainly wouldn't have supported any move to make the public gallery any larger for the 3 times in a year, if that it was full, you know.
Yeah, just to come back to the religious aspect, I mean, one thing I'd want to say is that we are, after all, a majority non-religious country now, and so why not make meetings secular, whilst at the same time allow people, and you've both done this, allow people to have their own private prayers. I mean, what puzzles me about the whole thing is that Christians and Muslims tell me that praying is a personal dialogue for them with their God.
Yeah.
So why is it so important for them that everyone, religious or not, should indulge in that public display? I've never understood that. It seems a complete contradiction, unless it's a way of, you know, forcing everyone to knuckle down and give the impression that everyone's religious, which they're not. I mean, Geoff, do you think it would be useful to invite Councillor Hastings to come forward and explain as to why it's so important that every council meeting should start with prayers? I mean, I'd really like to know.
I would like to know as well, to be frank. I've never heard, frankly, a rational explanation as to why it's so important in 16 years. You know, whenever we discussed my motion in the past, as I say, there was silence, probably, perhaps it was silent, horrific, a silence of horror at what I just announced, you know, when I made this announcement. But I have no idea why he's discussed it. I think was the word that
Yes,
that was used in the book.
Disgusted is a strong word to use, isn't it?
Very strong word. And it's interesting, he's corresponded with the leader of the council about this matter, but he hasn't corresponded with me until yesterday, because I had formally told all the members of my intention to have a separate venue near the council chamber, half an hour ahead of full councils in the future. Now, in the longer term, I mean, I hope I'm not the chairman for longer than a year. There's a maximum of 2 years anyway. It's not really a role that I've ever sought in my life, to be honest. And it's in a year's time, I would anticipate that the group that I am a part of, we're an alliance of mainly independent councillors, but a couple of Green Party councillors as well. We're supported by the one Labour councillor, the one Lib Dem councillor, and something called the Vectors Party, which is the Latin for Isle of Wight. And that's how we've got a majority. I would anticipate, as long as we hold that together, which I'm confident we will, that I will be succeeded by chairmen from my group who are not going to do what happened in Basingstoke and Dean. They're just going to go along with the arrangements I put in place. Sadly, if we don't hold it together for the 4-year duration and the Conservative gets in, I have no doubt that we will return to what happened in Basingstoke and Dean, and that prayers will be reintroduced. It is even by some of the councillors who've emailed me to tell me they totally agree with me. And I will be retaining those emails for the future battles ahead.
Careful, I'll probably send this message to this interview to your opposition, because I will ask him. I will invite him to come.
Yes, why not?
Actually, Martin is far too shy to say this, but I can tell you, Geoff, that you would thoroughly approve. When Martin became mayor, he had a very nice car. And you had a chauffeur, didn't you, Martin?
No.
Oh, and you can imagine everyone's surprise when the mayor turned up on a bike.
Yeah,
which I think is wonderful.
I did research, Martin. I always prepare for most things, and I have seen the press coverage of that. Sadly, I haven't got that opportunity because we got rid of the car and everything about 20 years ago on the Isle of Wight. But I'm a cyclist as well. But frankly, if I look out of my window, I can almost see County Hall, so it's not really far for me to go.
Well, Geoff, you might be interested that one of my colleague councillors told me that the cycling was awful because it lowered the dignity of the office.
Yes.
And I had difficulty with that because, there's quite a few royals around Europe on bikes. And somehow they remain equally royal. It doesn't seem to do them too much harm, but
even prime ministers go around on bikes sometimes.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
We don't want to stray into royalty, though, of course, because that's another thing that upsets the local dignitaries. Because I'm a Republican as well. so I've got quite a difficult situation where I'm primarily the chairman of the council to keep control of the meetings, to be honest. My vice chair is comfortable, is a churchgoer, a real every Sunday churchgoer, and also has no problem with royalty. And we have an agreement that when I feel it's impossible for me to do something, she will do it instead of me. And that's it. And we've made an agreement as to the response. For instance, on Monday, it would normally be Armed Forces Day around about now, but there's something called the flag raising ceremony. I don't know if it's a county thing, I suspect. I will attend that. I will attend it because the island's main war memorial is outside a church in Newport. I will attend that with the Lord Lieutenant of the Isle of Wight and various other dignitaries and other senior councillors. And there will be a very brief moment of prayer within that, and I will participate to the level. Well, I won't participate, you know what I mean. I will participate in the day, but of course, that part will be irrelevant to me. But I do feel that that I should show, as the chairman of the Isle of Wight Council, the due respect to the armed forces, past and present and future. And sadly, I've got no influence over that. You know, there is a very short party to it. But then I go to funerals in churches. I used to go to weddings in churches, you know, and, you know, there are times when I will, you know, I will encounter religion in my life, and, you know, I will deal with it appropriately, with respect.
Yeah.
The armed forces are very important to me
Yes,
as well, because I was involved with the armed forces as a humanist.
Right.
Martin, just before we close up, do you want to say something?
No, I was just wanting to concur with what Geoff just said now, because you do get invited to quite a lot of events, and some of those events are indeed, you know, church events, and I have to say, when everybody else is around you is vigorously praying the Lord's Prayer or something, one's silence can be very noticeable, and dealing with that was one of the things that sometimes left a bit of discomfort, should we say. I found that when it was hymn singing, I could join in, because somehow I didn't feel that was the same sort of commitment.
Right,
And so I would, where I could and where I didn't think I'd frighten the horses too much, I joined in the singing. But the praying, I drew the line at that. You know, I'm amazed that when I'm listening to Geoff on how many areas we're sort of so much on the same wavelength. Just a quick anecdote about the situation with the armed forces and the Remembrance Day. The thing that I got the most criticism for as a mayor was Remembrance Day, where I gave a speech. Well, I didn't give a speech, you know, I said some words that I felt were fitting, but again, you know, I felt I should be there. But what I said was, Remembrance Day shouldn't just be about the last war, it should be about remembering the wars all around the world, and they're still continuing, and that's what we should be remembering, in particular, that wars don't really solve that much and do a lot of harm. And we had the Bishop of Basingstoke there, who very kindly came along, which was unusual. It was particularly unusual because, as I say, not as a member of the church in any way, but he came and joined in the remembrance service. And afterwards, the papers were full, particularly from the British Legion members, saying how terrible this was and what blasphemy it was for me to broaden the Remembrance Day from what we really should have been concentrating on, etc. And, you know, it got quite nasty. Ironically, though, the local Old Basing British Legion, that you will be familiar with, David, were quite supportive of me. In fact, I now print their annual leaflet, annual service, remembrance service leaflets. So, you know, they obviously haven't fallen out with me.
Yeah, just as a point of interest, you may not know this, but there's been a humanist remembrance ceremony at the Fitzroy Chapel in London every year for at least the last 10 years, I think.
That's not had much publicity, David.
Pardon?
That's not had much publicity.
Well, we give it as much publicity as we can, but
Nationally.
Yeah, but humanism tends not to get much press cover. But if you're saying that, I assume that lots of people, certainly in humanism, know about it. But perhaps we should make more about that. But yeah, the Fitzroy Chapel in London is a beautiful secular chapel, and I've been there several times, and it's just fantastic. Look, I'm going to start winding up now, but are there any last-minute comments that either of you would like to make before I close?
No, well, just speaking for myself, I'll just say quickly, it's been fantastic to meet a fellow traveller.
Yeah.
And,
well, actually, you obviously do get on very well, so perhaps we should arrange that.
We do now, yes.
I feel like I'm replicating Martin's footsteps from a few years ago. I mean, certainly, just very quickly, I will do Remembrance Day. I am and have been in the past the chairman of the town council in Newport, and I always, when I am the chair, do Remembrance Day. But when they all troop off into the church for the service afterwards, I quickly dodge away and go home, you know, but I always lay the wreath and the rest of it.
Yeah.
So I do know how to handle it where religion impinges on some of these events. Thank you.
Well, I just thank you for that. I'd just like to round up by finishing with a statement of the legal position about these ceremonies just before council meetings, which comes from the Secular Society, and I'm quoting the Secular Society here. On the 10th of February 2012, the National Secular Society won a landmark legal challenge to prayers during council meetings. The High Court ruled that holding prayers is not within a council's legal powers. The legal challenge, which took the form of a judicial review, was initiated after informal requests to end the practice of prayers was refused by the Bidford Town Council. The case was presided over by the judge in charge of the Administrative Court, Mr. Justice Ousley, on the 2nd of December 2011. Now, with that thought, I'd just like to say thank you from me to both of you gentlemen for your candour, your honesty, your generosity with your time, and above all, your entertainment, which has been brilliant, and for sharing your time with us today. And I'd like to finish by saying thank you also to Simon Bligh, who's the chair of the Isle of Wight Humanists, without whom this exchange would not have taken place. So thank you to you all. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for your time.
Cheers, David.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you both.
And you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye now.